Hello and welcome to Reading the Gospels Together for Friday, September the 11th, and our Great Acts summary. Now, the book of Acts ends with a bit of a cliffhanger. Paul in Rome in rented accommodations under a loose form of house arrest, awaiting trial before the emperor, receiving visitors, welcoming and witnessing to any who would listen, and busily writing away. But what happened to him after that? How did he die? How can we know? Well, the early Christians knew. Scholar Stephen Miller sums it up this way. He says, early Christian writers agree that Paul was martyred in Rome. The first person we know of who said this was a Roman bishop, Clement, writing to the Corinthians in 96 AD, roughly 30 years after Paul's execution. Now, Gaius, a church leader in Rome in the early 100s, said that he could point out the grave monuments of Paul and Peter on Vatican Hill, which was later leveled to build St. Peter's Basilica. And some years ago, within recent history, underneath the basilica, they uncovered what is firmly believed to be the bones of St. Peter. Now, Paul was probably beheaded with a sword. That was the quick method of execution, which was granted to Roman citizens found guilty of a capital offense. Non-citizens often faced the more lingering and horrible death of crucifixion, which is how Peter was believed to have died. Now, the most difficult question about Paul's death is when it took place. Most scholars argue it happened in about 62 AD at the end of Paul's 2-year house arrest in Rome or shortly thereafter. Now, Luke's abrupt ending in Acts could imply this, and it would be consistent with Emperor Nero's behavior at the time, which was aggressively anti-Christian. Other scholars say that the Romans released Paul, who briefly visited some churches he'd planted and then turned west to evangelize Spain, a long-standing dream of his. Now, Paul's letter to Philemon, written when he was under house arrest, shows he expected acquittal. He says, "Prepare a guest room for me because I hope to be restored to you in answer to your prayers." And in Clement's letter to the Corinthians, in the 90s AD, he said that Paul went to the limit of the West. That could mean Spain. If this is what happened, Paul was probably arrested then a second time and executed in Rome around AD 66. Now, I personally believe that the evidence points most strongly to the first account, 62 AD. Had Paul spent an additional 4 years of mission activity, it seems highly unlikely that there's no supporting evidence or documentation. No Spanish communities of faith, for instance, tracing their heritage back to Paul, as there are throughout Greece and Turkey. More certain than the time of Paul's death is the manner in which he faced it. In his last recorded words, he told Timothy, "I'm already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." That's found in 2 Timothy chapter 4, a very touching chapter. Now, if this timeline is correct, 62 AD, it seems most likely to me that Luke completed his gospel while in and out of Caesarea during Paul's lengthy imprisonment, and Luke completed the book of Acts during Paul's house arrest in Rome. I further believe that Luke completed Acts in the form that we have it prior to Paul's death. It seems inconceivable to me that Luke would not have included it in his account had he been writing later. The ending also doesn't sound as though we're missing a page. It's a very firm, concise ending that we do have. Now, what of the wider church? After all, the primary characters in Acts sort of vanish before our eyes in terms of the New Testament. The early history of the church, however, can fill in some blanks. Now, as we mentioned, there's strong evidence that Peter ended up in Rome together with Mark, his secretary, the same Mark who had gotten into trouble with Paul and ended up with his uncle Barnabas. It's also the same Mark who wrote the gospel which bears his name, a gospel largely based on Peter's account of Jesus. You'll be happy to know that while in Rome, Paul reconciled with Mark and counted him to be a valuable companion. Writing from Rome to his protege Timothy, Paul says in probably one of his final passages, "Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he's helpful to me in my ministry." What of some others? Well, Jesus' brother James, who ultimately headed the Jerusalem church, was tragically killed in an attempt by the high priest to gain power. This death was met with deep criticism, not only from the Christian community, but from the Jewish community in Jerusalem as well. Such was James's reputation for piety and compassion. And the outcry resulted in the rare removal of the high priest from office. As for the rest of the Jerusalem church, tragedy befell the city when the Romans quashed the Jewish uprising, which began in Caesarea in 66 AD, and took only 4 years to reach Jerusalem, laying waste to the country, leveling the temple, and much of Jerusalem in the process. Many in the Christian community, rightly believing that this was not their war, fled to Jordan and other places, eventually returning and establishing a small community of Jerusalemite believers centered on Mount Zion. A further civil war in the 130s resulted in the Romans calling an end to Israel. Most Jews were enslaved or expelled. The country was renamed Palestine. Jerusalem was renamed Aelia Capitolina and rebuilt under the Emperor Hadrian's direction as a Roman city. The Christian community in Jerusalem, while small, nevertheless persisted and flourished again until the capture of Jerusalem by the Muslims in the 600s. But it was the Gentile wing of the church which became the dominant Christian expression of faith. By this time, Rome, under Constantine the Great, declared Christianity a tolerated religion in the early 300s. By then, it had spread throughout the Mediterranean world and well beyond into India, Ethiopia, North Africa, Europe, Armenia, and more, all boasting strong Christian communities. With the declaration of Christianity as the so-called official religion or favored religion of the Roman Empire in the late 300s, that which Peter and Paul and the others could never so much as dream came to pass. The call of Jesus to bring the gospel from Jerusalem throughout Judea, through Samaria, and to the ends of the earth has certainly come to pass. And we're part of that story, part of that family. Each one of us traces our Christian faith back to Acts chapter 1, and those 120 or so souls gathered together, praying in an upper room, wondering what God would do next. And chapter 2 told us just what God would do next, and the aftershocks still shake our world to this day and our lives. Acts is our book. It's about us. It reminds us of our heritage and how that heritage was expanded to include all people under this amazing umbrella of faith in Jesus, Jew and Gentile alike. Well, thank you for journeying with me. I have loved every minute of it. While I begin work on the upcoming Gospel of John series in our Reading the Gospels Together videos, we'll be presenting a series of daily videos which I know that you'll enjoy. I encourage you nonetheless to go back to the beginning of Acts and read through it quite quickly, say 5 or 10 chapters a day, to reacquaint yourself with the friends that you've met, Barnabas, Philip, Lydia, Priscilla, to get an unbroken sense of the flow of the book while the studies are still fresh in your mind. You'll be glad you did. You'll be amazed at how much you've already forgotten, and hopefully you'll be also amazed at how much you remember and how this story is now a part of your life too. So, that's it for Acts. God bless you, and we'll see you on Sunday.